this? All right. Run, put out the fire. All right. Thank you. Not yet. Nero. That's for later. Okay. Um, well, good afternoon. Or good morning if you're, or good evening, wherever you're at. Yeah. Welcome. There are actually 4 people here watching. Thank you for showing up. Uh, yeah, we haven't done a lot of streaming. I decided I'd just basically take the summer off. We did the one stream where we talked about Nick Fuentes, who is the hot topic. I'm going to try not to talk about Nick because there are people out there I see now that's weird too. And that video, the last one, preceding this one, um, I didn't put in there, I guess, I didn't I didn't expect and even think to try and get more action because I was talking about Nick and I didn't intend to talk about Nick all that much. Um, and I do this so haphazardly. Hi, Kyle. Well, good evening then. Uh, Good to see you're staying up late to watch. Thank you. And I mean, I don't even think to try and maximize. I just put it out there. Uh, you know, for like 20 years, I've occasionally blogged, and then maybe 10 years now, this. And I always think, yeah, I would really like to do this on a more serious level, but I never actually do anything to advance that. So I didn't even think, oh, we're going to talk about Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes. I've decided I'm going to say Fuentes like some people um, but it got like 700 something views, which is this here, I'm lucky to get 100 people watch of one of these videos. Like this one will probably do, if I'm lucky. Excuse me. If I'm lucky, this one will do 100 plus. I'm happy with that. But somehow for this level, it blew up. I got like 700 people coming in and watching it. Strangers, I guess, coming in. So I guess somehow it got in the algorithm, right? That's the only explanation is that somehow it got. I don't think YouTube promotes anything from this channel at all, but I mean, however it works, it somehow got a little bit of action. Most people are probably thoroughly disappointed because that's another thing about me doing this. It's such a joke that I absolutely, the style that works is anathema to my personality. I mean, I'll tune in and I'll see people who do it. They do it right. I'm not putting them down. They're doing it correctly. I should force this on myself how to do it, but Jesus, I can't act like that. High energy. Man, let me tell you about this. Or just the various, there's like 3 or 4 kind of, I've seen basic methods for getting action. And none of them appealed to me, and none of them I couldn't do if I tried. You know what I mean? It would just look ridiculous. So people probably came and they saw this old dude sitting here rambling, low energy. By the way, it's not low energy, guys. It's calm, you know. And I was thinking about that today. I'm already off on a tangent. Sorry. But affectation has returned. Now, you ever watch old movies? And you watch old movies like pre 60s. Good movies, bad movies, doesn't matter. But there was a different style, even like great Orson Welles movies. It was before they started, this realism took hold, this naturalism took hold in film. Maybe as a gosh, excuse me, as a result of, the French New Wave or something, which I didn't know shit about. Uh, but, around the 60s, they started trying to make it look, people talk like they really talked, make it dialogue sound more realistic, you know. I remember a story, Robert Altman tells a story about when he made MASH, and MASH was a huge hit. Not that horrible TV series, but there was a movie called MASH. Um, and he has a scene in there where they're all in the operating room, right? They've got a bunch of, it's a military hospital, right? And they've got a bunch of injured soldiers in there. And so there's like, uh, you know, 3 or 4 operations going at the same time, pulling bullets out of guys' brains and stuff. And so he makes it real and and it's a somewhat chaotic scene and people are talking over each other and stuff. And he says he barely got it past the studio because the studio execs, it was, and it was thoroughly realistic and it was, uh, and the studio execs couldn't even see it. They just looked at it and said, "Well, this is all wrong. You got people talking over. People are talking at the same time." You know, so it was like, you know, films for a long time were still treated to a large extent like filmed theatrical productions, like plays. Guys stand on the stage and project, right, and give speeches almost every time. They do asides where they're just like talking to themselves, kind of shit. Uh, and you see the way, though, aside from that, the way people talk, right? This affected talk. Well, dear, I don't know about you, right? Like, even back then, people didn't talk like that in their regular lives, even though men wore suits. In ways, it looks a lot better. I don't want to be a guy who just automatically thinks it's better because men wore suits and women wore clothes. But, you know, um, the way people talked in movies, it just was so unreal. You know what I mean? I mean, you think about these stars who were huge, who are almost forgotten now, I think. Spencer Tracy and the female lead who was famous for Tracy and Hepburn, Catherine Hepburn, right? And if I ever come across one of those guys in a film, I mean, I just can't take it. I cannot listen to them. You know what I mean? I don't even see it as acting. It's like they're giving speeches, right? They're rhetoricians. They're not even friggin' actors. What the fuck am I watching? It's all affected. And then I realized, though, today, and I get drawn into scrolling. I'm going to make it so I mean, I'm kind of not as, I know I'm not as bad as the average person. Doom scrolling and slop scrolling, is that a phrase? It should be. Slop scrolling is so common now. I mean, I live in a sort of working class environment. The guys I work with are, the old kind of what used to be, the beer drinking working class hard hat guys. And they're all scrolling on their phones. I mean, I'm just astounded by how often, right? Nobody can sit still without whipping the phone out and scrolling. I'm breaking myself of that. I do it a little, but I don't, not nearly as bad, I don't think, as the average person. But I'm just struck now, and maybe because I'm looking for it, how often I see people just scrolling and that fucking look that comes over someone's face when they're just scrolling. And I mean, I'll go to meetings, again, meetings with, like, again, these are working class guys. They're basically like construction workers. And I see this on construction sites. 4 or 5 guys. Sometimes everybody's on their phone, just dull scrolling, right? It's addictive and it should be resisted. It can't be good, right? Maybe it's not as bad as some of us seem to think, but it cannot be good. And so, I mean, I'm just trying to wean myself entirely off of it. Um, you know, and it's so often, it's probably like this for you. I've heard people say this. You go specifically to something online and you're drawn in right away to something else, right? You go see something. Somebody refers a clip to you, and you go look at it. You know, you can't. You can't go to fucking YouTube, right? You got to deliberately tell yourself, right? I'm gonna go watch this thing, and then bounce, as the kids would say, and I'm gonna bounce out of there, right? Because fucking shorts, like in YouTube, it's shorts. I didn't even go to fucking excuse me, Instagram or any of the other things. What is it? TikTok, Instagram, whatever else. But it doesn't matter. They're all the same. I mean, YouTube has shorts, right? And they're addictive. And anytime you go look at anything, there they are lining up for you. They're AI algorithm driven now, and they don't even know how they work, really. I mean, the guys who created this and set this thing loose on us don't even understand what AI is really, how AI is better than they are at drawing your ass into it, which is scary. But yeah, you just have to make a conscious decision. Anyway, fucking tangent upon tangent, right? Affectation. So I was watching some of this slop somewhere. Uh, and oh, it was there should be a name for this, right? Somebody was talking about this video, and it was of just a douchey, middle aged liberal woman, like the worst fucking human being, right? Just like the most least appealing human beings now are these sort of, and I never see them in real life. I mean, maybe there aren't that, maybe they're more rare than, I hope they're rarer than you would think from watching fucking TikTok or something. But these women, like, they're going to go on and talk about, and I don't even fucking like Trump, but to see them come on and talk about Trump and MAGA voters, I mean, it's doubly unappealing because of the fact that all their hate for Trump is all for the wrong fucking reason. They think he's Hitler, when he's this fuck Zionist. Uh, he's a secret globalist Zionist shithead anyway, and they think it's Hitler and the Nazis because anyway. But she's talking. The woman is talking, and I realize there's this is the modern day affectation. We don't see it because we're used to it. But there is, just like there was that affectation in old movies, people giving speeches. Well, my dear, now there's a new affectation, and it's kind of pseudo casual, but it's every bit as affected. And I hope in a few short years we will look back and we'll see, TikTok videos and whatnot from 4 or 5 years previous, and we're going to be thinking, why are they, just like watching the old movies, why are they talking like that, right? But anyway, I got off on this whole tangent because I was talking about what makes what makes this work here. Hey, Rustin, good to see you. What makes what makes for engagement on YouTube? Well, it's a little too affected for me. I like natural speech. I don't even need it like in my movies and shit. I mean, for all of what I just said, the old affected movies have something on the new ones because, we've gone so far into naturalism in films that we get mumblecore now, right? And we've got actors who have zero fucking charisma, keeping it real by mumbling, you know. Uh, so, I mean, but here, for me, doing this live casting is you speak normally. Speak normally. You don't mug and move your head around and project and just speak. You're sitting here and I pretend like, this is what they used to tell. I think I've heard this said that they used to tell radio guys, talk radio or DJs, you speak as if you're speaking to one person, right? You don't think of it like there's this big invisible audience out there like there is. No, you just speak normally like Me and you sitting across the table. That's what I like. That's what appeals to me. I hope it appeals to you. Now, what was the subject? Like I said, I don't want to talk about Nick Fuentes or any of that, though I still team Nick. I'm just waiting to see how this ends, right? A brief word on Nick, I guess. He's blowing up. Um, and honestly, that reason alone makes me shelve a lot of the complaints, a lot of the objections to Nick Fuentes. Uh, you know, he's a Mexican. That never gained any purchase with me anyway. He's gay boy in his basement or whatever the fuck. Um, I do think it's odd that he's incel and like in his 20s, and he's an incel and he seems committed to that. I don't understand why natural urges aren't operating on young men now, but there's some weird shit going on anyway. Uh, but I just think for the simple reason that Nick is gaining traction and he has changed the conversation, hasn't he? You may not like it. Maybe you don't like Nick. A lot of people don't like him, and I ask anyone who just generally doesn't like him to examine their reasons and think, well, maybe it's jealousy. Because I'll be honest, I feel jealousy for anybody who's doing anything interesting, right? I mean, I still work for a living, right? I would love to be able to full time uh, expound on these things that concern me so much. I would love to be able to influence the national conversation. I would love to be where he is right now, where he is single handedly moving that Overton window over on the single most important issue there is, and that's the issue of Jewish power. I mean, everything else is bullshit. If you're talking about communists or Muslim Islamofascism or any of it, I mean, even if you're talking about the problem of women, you're maybe close to the main issue, but you're not on it. You're not over the actual target. You're not focused on the Death Star. You're taking out the little whatever. I fucking hate Star Wars, so I don't know. Whatever the aircraft or the spacecraft that guard the Death Star, you're dealing with those. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. This sort of Gordian knot. It's beautiful in a way, and it's a little bit terrifying because, like I said, I'm curious to see how how Nick ends, how this whole thing with Nick resolves, you know, because as likely as not, they're going to destroy this young man somehow. Um, but the broader problem for power is that everybody's talking about the Jews. And there are people who, like, I guess I got to talk about Nick in this context. There are people out there who are of the left, who are mainstream, even though they're not, you know, in mainstream media, but and people like Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald or these lefties or former lefties, often Jewish people. Our friend here, what's our friend Art Bell talks about him. Lionel, the guy who does podcasts, has been saying, he's Jewish. I mean, even Jewish people are talking to Nick about Nick and about what he's saying. And Nick he's not doing this pussyfooting around thing that people are doing. Oh, it's not Jews. I'm talking about Zionists. You know, um, well, it is Jews because the Zionists wouldn't be carrying the day if it was just the Zionists, right? Like I always say, it APAC and all the money spent does not explain what we're seeing, the incredible, unprecedented, remarkable feature that the United States, the most powerful country ever, is not at all and has not at all been in control of its foreign policy for decades now. I've been reading something I want to recommend to you. It's free, and I think I got it by way of Ron Unz. I mean, this was written around 1950. It's called The Iron Curtain Over America. You may have heard of it. And this guy, like around 50, 51, right shortly after the big war. Let's see if I can find it, if I can show it. I don't know if I'm allowed to show it. Let's see if, yeah, anyway, The Iron Curtain Over America was written by, I don't even know the author. Anyway, he's talking about Jewish power in 1950, and he made, you realize in 1950, this guy made the charge, and he's backing it up with the receipts, as the kids say, that the U.S. had already lost control of its foreign policy to Zionists, right after World War II, and probably before, because speaking of Unz, there's another article Unz wrote, which I recommend. It's about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Unz wrote an article about Franklin Delano Roosevelt where he said, you know what, this guy's probably not the brilliant hero that the left makes him out to be because of the New Deal and everything else and supposedly winning World War II. He makes the argument that Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually wasn't that bright or energetic or that engaged or knowledgeable about anything. He arrived at where he arrived in the presidency partly out of luck and circumstances. He surrounded himself with a lot of people who were smarter than him, many of them Jewish, of course, and they ran the country. And of course, FDR became very popular and was able to have, 4 terms? In large part because of the New Deal and basically got hold of the public purse and he started handing shit out. And I'm not against that. I don't give a shit about this argument. Big government, small government, government spending. That's not important. Anyway. But it's remarkable that, of course, that means that Jewish control of your government begins around, in the 30s, sometime after they got rid of Calvin Coolidge. Remember, Calvin Coolidge was president in the 20s and maybe the last genuinely conservative, sensible president. They like to make fun of him, Silent Cal, or, as if he wasn't that bright. And maybe it's that Calvin Coolidge was quite capable and bright, and Roosevelt, who follows him or follows after Wilson, was in fact the dummy. But it was Calvin Coolidge who signed into law the last sensible immigration restriction of the 1920s, and it only lasted about 10 years before they were subverting it. But, after all of these radicals, all of these Eastern Europeans, overwhelming and unprecedented numbers of Jewish immigrants from Russia and Eastern Europe, was a whole different kind of Jew from the Germanic Jews that we knew, who were middle class, bourgeois, prosperous, and mostly conservative Reform Jews. We started getting these radicals, the same assholes who were behind Bolshevism. And so we said, okay, enough of this. Let's let's turn this tap off so we can, digest some of this fucking shit that we've just sucked up. Anyway, I got off. The short version is that, it's not Zionist. It's, you would not have Zionists in control of your government if you did not have more broadly, Jews in control of your media and culture. Obviously, obviously, and I mean, I always say this, it's my shame, but, well into my 40s, before I started even thinking about the Jewish question. I mean, to me, it was almost like, oh yeah, there's the Jews, and they're just, they're they're just like, their net effect is a wash. This idiotic notion that people still try to push on you. That there they are, this remarkable people who had even 2% of the population, they control fucking half the wealth and all the media. But that means nothing because, some of them are conservative, some of them aren't. And, it's so fucking stupid, especially when you have this thing with Zionism, especially when you have this thing of the history of anti Semitism. And again, I always say, just as I don't say, oh, it's the Zionists, not the Jews, I don't want to waste my time trying to argue that the Jews haven't had it rough, trying to argue that they haven't been beat up a little bit. They have. But of course, we understand why. This is this astounding devil's trick that they pulled off where they've got you because you're precisely because of your good Christian nature, your mild European blood, precisely because you're more liberal than other people would be about this. They've got you condemning yourself for the history of anti Semitism when, if you took their approach to things, if you took what is considered a sophisticated approach to things, you would look at it and you would say, oh, it's bad, but it's not black and white, right? And there are understandable human reasons why they would be the victims of anti Semitism when they're this small group that holds a profoundly chauvinistic religion and culture, refuses to assimilate, refuses to tolerate you, the majority, wherever they are, uh, and works in finance, right? And works in tax collection, right? And is known for working in these industries and is known for working on behalf of monarchs, right? And is known as working as sort of Praetorian guard for monarchs, not just collecting taxes and everything else, but acting as the bad cop for every fucking monarch who was, the more removed he was from his people, the more likely he had a coterie of Jews around him doing his dirty work. But again, and beyond that, like I say about the Holocaust, I don't give a fuck. I'm not here to fucking, I don't deny it. I don't know, honestly. I'm sure it's overblown as hell. But if it's the greatest crime or the greatest deceit ever, doesn't change my desire one iota. It doesn't move my needle one fucking tick, whether or not it was the greatest evil or is the greatest deception in history, because my people deserve to live. Why do people? I just don't understand people. This is why I'll never succeed. This is why I would never be a political leader. I do not understand that people can't see that. I don't understand that people can't operate on that. When I start to explore this, then I kind of understand more and more because it sounds awful. I was trying to write about it earlier today, just writing notes, and I can't get it coherent because it's such anathema to the way we're raised. But thinking about principle and universal morality, and to me, I mean, I just increasingly am getting this Machiavellian view that universal morals are death, absolute death. I mean, they're just next to cowardice among. I mean, they're immoral because they're never reciprocated. It's unilateral disarmament before a world that, as you see now, is consuming you, my Christian European friends. And we're all Christian, even if we consider ourselves atheists, just like our Jewish friends who, you know, say they're atheists. But I'm also a Jew, you know. Rustin Rohr says, juices are like high IQ N-word. Well, it's, yeah. There's a malice. There's a shared malice, right? That's all falling apart now, too. That's another crazy thing with Nick. He's got black people watching him and saying, yeah, even when he's talking about the black people, no holds barred, honestly, Basically, he's saying stuff I've been telling you for the last 10 years, but that's okay. I know you didn't get it from me, and I guess I didn't. It didn't originate here. I'm kind of influenced by other people, but I'm struck often by how much it sounds like things I've been saying for years. Um, but he's got black people watching and going, yeah, and not just the Hodge twins, but just like regular black folk turning up. It's really funny, in that ridiculous interview he did with Candace Owens. There was a moment where Candace Owens went, "We was kings." Have you seen it? If you've seen it, it's hilarious. So they get on the subject, and he tells her, Nick says something about, how Africans never invented shit. They never didn't even invent the wheel. And she says, "What about the Egyptians?" Yeah, and she thinks she gotcha, right? He says, "Oh yeah, yeah, of course. We're talking about sub-Saharan Africans. You know that." Oh, Egypt isn't part of Africa now. It just fuck. I used to think she was crazy but kind of smart. Now I think she's just crazy and kind of dumb. But yeah, I mean, the shared malice of blacks and Jews is not holding it together. That was the subject how we talked about Nick, and it's not just Nick. It's it's been, but it didn't originate with Nick, but this sort of tide has been rising, right? And it's a direct result of really of social media, despite the remarkable censorship, despite the fact that the mainstream media is in many ways less free, right? I think they used to platform Pat Buchanan. They used to platform Peter Brimelow. It was like now it's forget it. I mean, you got to be everybody's got to be to the left of Stephen Colbert and just as trite and stupid as he is, or they don't let you near the building. They'll call security if you walk past the sidewalk, down the sidewalk in Manhattan, wherever fucking CVS or whatever is. But despite that, we're out here, and, even though Elon Musk is not our friend, and he's yet another idiot, quasi Zionist kind of dork. Um, Despite that, his buying Twitter has made a huge difference. Even though strange things are happening over at Twitter, it's just weird. Um, and I guess it should be encouraging because people will post things on Twitter that are, that are obvious uh, right, uh, rightist expressions. Uh, and there's definitely an organized effort going on now to refute it. You know what I mean? If I go on there and say something politically incorrect, no matter how obvious it is, you know what I mean? No matter how, I could post something about that savage Negro who stabbed that Ukrainian girl to death on the train. In fact, I think I did see this. And some asshole, no, not more than one, will come in and try to make an argument on behalf of this psychopathic Negro who stabbed this woman to death. And this is a model that anywhere you go. And it's just too consistent to not think that they've done something with the algorithm now, where if, certain subjects come up, black crime is definitely one of them. Jewish power is definitely one of them. That regardless of what you say, there's going to be a handful of rebuttals up top. And precisely because the rebuttals are so often so ridiculous, so laughable, I mean, they might be bots, right? They might be bots, should be the name of an album. If people still made record albums, concept albums, you know, but it's obvious. Somebody at Twitter is doing this. Some group is doing this, or the algorithm is doing this, uh, where they're bound and determined. They've decided somehow they're going to let us speak, but they're going to try and refute us, right? Uh, in the same way that they had Grok, and then Grok went Mecha Hitler, and they took it down, and then it's back up, and it's now like fucking. It's like the end of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when Jack Nicholson comes back and he's had a lobotomy, and he's like, right, it's time for a big mute Indian to smother Grok with a pillow at this point. Rushton Rohrer says, I talked to a Jew that seems trustworthy and asked him if he thought he had a universal morality, and he told me he felt he did, but I can't be sure. Yeah, well, that's another thing, too. My anti-Semitism doesn't really apply at the individual level. There are too many individual Jews I know that I frankly haven't had real relationships with Jewish people. Not that I knew of. I knew one Jewish guy who didn't come across as Jewish at all, uh, who was a degenerate. But, I don't hold that against all Jews. There are too many individual Jews that seem okay. And when I consider this question, the Jewish question, and what I think of as malice coming from the Jews as a group, I realize even if they're composed entirely, this is another problem. And I sit down and I write notes and I try to flesh out these ideas, and it's hard to do it, mostly out of fear. But I've become also convinced that another group can be composed by a majority of people of high intelligence, high moral character, honesty, law abiding. We could say that about Jews. I don't know about the high moral character part. That's a little more complicated. Clearly, you've got a population that's intelligent, law abiding, industrious, right? Uh, Maybe they're a little cynical about morals. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe they really are, as they pretend to be, people who are very concerned about right and wrong. You can have that population be composed mostly of these people, good people. At an individual level, you'll mostly like them. And they can still be deadly to you. This I want you to fucking remember. Just take it and just cut your chest open and put it in there, because it's true. I'm convinced they could be mostly the most decent folk and still be a threat to you at the group level, right? In fact, that group of people, if they're working, if they have a high degree of organization and energy, right, and self regard, ethnic self regard, they might be the most dangerous people out there for you. Because, I'll think about the Negroes, right? Nobody's more malicious than they are, nobody's more terrifying than they are. But, they wouldn't be shit. They weren't a problem for us until we started letting them loose, right? Until we started treating them as individuals on a par with us, right? So each individual Negro has the same rights as you, has the same privileges as you, more even. And they have that largely because of the energetic Jews, of course. But still, they would be no problem if we were allowed to deal with them as a group. If we were just allowed to reinstitute segregation, say, or just allowed, not even to be racist, not even to go full on segregationist Jim Crow, not even that. You could just, if we could somehow do it, resolve to enforce the laws evenly with total disregard for disparate impact. We don't care if 90% of the black population goes to jail. We're going to enforce laws against murder, against robbery, against rape, against all of these things. And we're going to enforce it across the board, white, black, we don't care, right? That's all we asked to do. That's all even, those dumb, and it wasn't boomers, it was fucking silent generation, it was World War II generation, full of themselves. We won World War II. We can fix any problem. We can fix the problem of black malice and stupidity, right? So don't tell me it's the boomers. But even those fools thought, yeah, that's all we're going to do. We're going to take our boot off their neck and we're just going to apply the laws evenly. And eventually they're going to come around. Well, as you say, they didn't come around. Something always has to give. Politics is really about who gets fucked over, or it's about what has to give way, right? Something has to give way. You make a decision, you're going to go in one direction or the other, and there's a trade off. Something has to be surrendered. And these fools thought, there's not going to be anything, it's just going to be all benefit, right? A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And this is the way they pitched it back in the 60s. Um, they pitched it largely as, well, you've got all this talent locked up in the black community that we're not taking advantage of because of discrimination. Yeah, okay. Uh, yeah, I mean, if we really went back and if we went back with a keener eye and revisited those instead of just blowing smoke up our own ass about the civil rights movement, we would see. Anyway, another tangent. The point is, uh, black people, whereas I'll take the average Jew as a friend, right? So I need someone in a lifeboat. I need to depend on somebody. I'll take the average Jew over the average black person, even though a lot of those black people would be fine friends. But you know what I mean, right? At the individual level, black people are unimpressive. Their character, Mr. Reverend King, we've had to look at the content of their character, and it peeled my fucking eyeballs. I have nightmares having had a good look at the content of your character. Shut the fuck up. And talking about affectation, right? Jesus, thank God we don't have any more preachers. I mean, as bad as they are now, as bad as the ghetto speak is now, that sing-song shit from Dr. King, no thank you. People eat that shit up. People ate that up. Anyway. Rustin says, I have encouraged and countered all types of Jews, and the marked types are the worst. He just felt very dark, like you can feel it. Yeah. Well, and that's what we need to consider too. There are different Jews. Because, and this is, a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, Jews are white. Uh, and there's a lot of European blood in there. I mean, as far as I can tell, and I haven't made a study of this, but the Khazar hypothesis is at least partly right. Uh, and that means there's a lot of Slavic, Mongol, and Turkish blood in there. Also, a lot of Southern European blood. And no small amount of Germanic in there. They're white, I'm not E. Michael Jones, and hey, go read this Jew about how the Irish were once considered not white. Shut the fuck up, dude. Just shut up. It's more complicated. When we say white, we're using a shorthand. When we say black, we're using a shorthand. Not so when we're saying Jew, obviously. That's not really shorthand. That's a very definitive thing. But anyway, and white is a much less accurate shorthand than black, for instance, which we mean, sub-Saharan African. But yeah, I mean, they are white, but they are alien, curiously alien, you know. And that's what thousands of years of separate breeding will do, even if you're all ultimately descended from Caucasians. You know, it's funny, those early Zionists, um, like early 20th century Zionists, which sounded often like so-called, you know, what they, the language they used sounded a lot like so-called racist, scientific racism of people like, I don't know, Galton and others. I was even reading something by one of them, and he uses the word Caucasian. He's talking about Jews as Caucasians. So there was, even Herzl uh, admired European culture a great deal. You know, we hold contradictions, and Herzl's a great example of that. He became increasingly Zionist, increasingly Jewish, uh, because the Europeans, I think it was Germany, right? Supposedly, the turning point was for him was when he didn't get into a fraternity in a German university because he was Jewish. But who knows? But it's just not all that simple. And I just argue that it shouldn't be simple. But we enter a time now. Now that Overton window is no, everybody's talking about black fatigue, um, and and you can see how. And speaking of Jews, and lots of Jews are participating in these conversations. Obviously, you can see how for a lot of Jews, you get the impression that they're giving up on the blacks and they're joining in with this black fatigue thing. Uh, Probably in part because they themselves are personally fed up, but also to the extent there are ulterior motives, you get the feeling that they're giving it up. They're like chaff that comes out the airplane to flares that come off the back of an airplane to try and trick the heat-seeking missiles away. They're throwing the blacks off the troika to the wolves because I think because we're talking about the Jews, and just as when October 7th rolled around, um, a lot of these Zionists, I talk about Steve Saylor a lot, hit the sudden respect for Steve Saylor, right? The sudden mainstreaming somewhat of Steve Saylor picked up after October 7th. And there was an element of it, you hear coming from these guys, frankly racist, where they're talking about the Palestinians as these brown, inbred brown, uh, you know, minorities, and that's the way we should look at them. Low IQ brown enemy, not the Jews. Jews, high IQ friend. It's that simple and stupid. Um, and I see it increasingly happening elsewhere. It's like they're saying, don't look at Shlomo. Look at DeQuavius. DeQuavius is the problem. DeQuavius. You know, um, and I'll still rag on black behavior, obviously, because it's there. It's a problem. We can't help it. But obviously, it's not the problem. I want to take a moment to talk about black fatigue, though. Hi, Rustin. Apparently, you're the only person here. You and Kyle and me. Hi, Art Bell. Art Bell might not even be here. Um, that's fine. Don't say anything. I'll give you the silent treatment too, man. No, I'm going to talk briefly about black fatigue, so-called black fatigue. And I'm sure somebody's already said this, but it's not appreciated enough how much the fatigue we're experiencing now is more or less a direct result of the deliberate coup push of 2020 when they took over maybe your city. They took over my city of Portland, my new city of Seattle, on the back of these BLM riots in 2020. Um, and now here we are 5 years later, and I'm reading in the newspaper about how Seattle's trying to take back their transit. They've had a few murders, shootings on transit. People haven't felt safe on transit for years now. Uh, and this is spreading, to the outer areas. It's getting as far away as, the suburbs 15, 20 miles out. Because here they're trying to extend it, and I'm all for it. I'm kind of a liberal on mass transit. I wish we had trains. I wish I could jump a train into the city. I still have to drive. But now they're trying to take control back of the, and this is like Seattle's like Portland on a bigger, more complicated scale. Anything like this that you try to do, just sensible things. Okay, we're going to try and make it so you don't get stabbed on the metro. They have to do it carefully. But they are definitely making moves now to take back the fucking trains and buses by putting cops out there and they they had cops just responding, you know, for a while. Now they're going to have, cops patrolling. Uh, and and you realize, so what happened? Well, we saw it. If you're a longtime viewer, you saw it. We watched the riots here. I went out and joined a couple. Um, the In 2020, they came through and they defunded police. They didn't get nearly as far as they wanted to, abolishing the police, but they cut police funds and then they took that money and gave it to black grifter outfits. So they took you know 10 million here, 15 million there away from your police department, so they could fire cops. And gave it to these shitty little grifter organizations. In Portland, we have them all over. Just a dozen people call themselves BLM Portland, and maybe they snag a grant for a couple mil, and that money goes into the bling and overpriced SUV economy. So they did that, but that was the least of it. The worst part of it was the laws, and they started changing laws, and they started, above all, not enforcing laws. So they took cops off the streets and they start, like in Portland, I think they did it here too. They said, we're not going to enforce traffic laws because too many black people get busted on traffic stops. Traffic stops are a good way. And often cops are pulling you over for a fucking tail light when they want to get a look at you, obviously. Uh, Too many black thugs were getting caught up in traffic stops. We stopped doing that. But we also, in Portland, and you don't know much about here, but they pretty much mirrored each other. It didn't stop with just laws directly affecting black people, right? Laws against homelessness. You can't camp on the sidewalks. No, those had to get thrown out. The people took advantage of the atmosphere when they were virtually unopposed. And it wasn't just let's take away laws that bust these poor innocent DeQuaviuses. Let's get rid of laws about homelessness. Let's get rid of laws about drug use, right? So it's no coincidence that the fentanyl epidemic blew up after 2020. It's no coincidence that homelessness blew up after 2020. And even with the laws that are specifically taken down just to benefit black criminals, people don't appreciate this. Uh, but, if you say we're not going to enforce the traffic laws because we don't want to take all these black people to jail, it also frees up all the white riffraff. And in a place like Portland, well, frankly, which makes it all the more ridiculous that BLM took off in Portland the way it did, there aren't a lot of black people, really. There's a lot of white riffraff, homeless and others who are attracted to Portland because, they'll fucking feed you and give you money and shit. Um, so you're lifting laws to lessen the disparate impact on black people. You don't just free up all those black criminals, you free up every criminal, white, whatever, white, Latino, whatever other criminals. They get a free ride, you know? So clearly the breakdown in order in Portland and Seattle, I mean, clearly it came from 2020, summer of 2020, and that insane coup. And we still haven't recovered. We still haven't put back in place. We may never fully recover from the loss of order. Um, but my point is, what we're seeing, this remarkable, all of a sudden, everybody's saying it out loud, even black people. I'm tired of these fucking Negroes and their criminal, stupid behavior. Well, it's because of 2020. It's because they pushed too far. Because they thought they thought they were going to take over. Remember, they didn't expect a retrenchment. You never expect that. They thought, 5 years on, they would still be running roughshod over law and order, over the average citizen, over bourgeois society, right? They would still be making progress. I mean, they would be cutting the police force more. They still want to do these things. But what happened, of course, is they got what they wanted in 2020. It resulted in entire downtown areas and once lovely cities being destroyed. Again, because it wasn't just about the black people who they pretend to care so much about. It wasn't just about black street criminals, because frankly, they were mostly killing each other, as always. These high-profile incidents, which you can't hide anymore in this age of social media, happen, and they got more of that. So they overstretched, they pushed too far. Uh, you know, it's like the old rule about when there was horse cavalry, right? If the horse cavalry came in and routed a larger infantry, footborne infantry, uh, it was bad news. They shouldn't. It was bad for them if they pursued too far. You want to chase off the bigger infantry force with your smaller horse-mounted cavalry, but you don't want to keep chasing them because at some point your cavalry gets spread out. And then at some point the infantry, which is running away on foot, realizes, hey, look, guys, there's only a couple of them right behind us. Let's go back there and kill those fuckers, right? And so all those horses, they're all spread out, and all of a sudden the horde that they've been chasing turns about, cuts them down. That's kind of what happened to the police abolitionist movement, and that's why we're getting, uh, this beneficial opening, is this beneficial sort of enlightenment, where even the average person um, is speaking openly and honestly about black malice. Um, yeah, but that's causing a bigger problem for the Jewish power that was behind it, and I guess sound conspiratorial minded at this point when I blame it on the Jews, but I do. Let's be honest, we wouldn't be here without them, you know. And like I always say, uh, every so called anti Semitic trope is a boast from their very lips in another context, right? So if I say, Jews were behind BLM here, oh my God, that's an anti Semitic trope. But if you're at a banquet and they're celebrating this glorious movement that is BLM, I guarantee you this has happened dozens of times at least. Some Jewish asshole has gotten up and said, And I would like to point out the role of Jews in making this all happen, right? I mean, this is everything. Feminism, the sexual revolution, um, you know, the liberation of laws around pornography, so-called civil rights, right? Countless Jews have gotten up and said, perhaps unwisely, we see now in retrospect, have gotten up and boasted about the role of Jews, the indispensable role of Jews in all of this, like that. And I'm not sure this isn't like a clever troll. There's this thing you've seen it. Probably, if you've seen it, you've probably seen it on X, Twitter. Some Jewish organization, supposedly a Jewish organization, put together this video, and it's a young woman, and she's supposed to be attractive, but again, back to this affect. She's very affected and very phony in the way she's delivering. But she comes on, right? She's a young, relatively attractive girl, and she comes on. She starts talking about how Jews rock, man, because of our role in gay rights, feminism, sexual liberation, civil rights, and it comes off like again, like listing anti-Semitic tropes, right? You know, uh, Rushton Rohrer says, seriously, Dale, watch out the anti-sex and the right. I have seen it up in Discord channels to different degrees of intensity. Yeah, well, I mean, one fire at a time. And yeah, this thing with incels, and Fuentes is guilty of this too. He doesn't have a proper answer for this either. But this idea among incels, and I agree, women are out of control. Women need to be brought back under control. We need to repeal women's rights. Women voting is a disaster. I agree with all of these things. But there are these guys out there, that's not good enough. You have to hate them. You have to, and they have no answer. I mean, they all supposedly want, I don't know, to survive in some form, right? They all supposedly want a restoration, I guess, but it's very nihilistic, very loser mentality where they're like, if you say anything about, like don't marry. Yeah, no, I mean, it's probably good individual advice for a young man is, well, don't marry. I mean, yeah, you probably don't want to get married right now. You know what I mean? I mean, there were very few are women you can trust in marriage, right? But yeah, no, there are these guys out there. I encountered them on X. What did I tweet? I was quote tweeting a guy who I agreed with. But he's talking about this weird thing about how they think like women are over there. We're never going to have sex. We're never going to marry. And we're never going to reproduce. Yet we're still reactionary right wing over here. I didn't use these words in a negative connotation. I hope you understand. And so we still talk about all these other things, and we have concern, right? And we have, we want to win, but if you so much as say, oh, maybe, if you say anything that's not like fucking sheer hatred toward women, you're a cuck, you're a bitch, right? And they just start up. There's fucking creepy, um, and it's scary because it's how badly destroyed. There are young men out there who haven't had sex. That was what was weird about Nick Fuentes. I guess I'm going to talk about Nick Fuentes again. But he gave this answer to Candace Owens, and she's such a dummy. She didn't. She could have got him good, but she just like this fucking bitch. She must have been on the rag, man. But she asked him, "Why aren't you married?" And he gives the answer that is just like the same one that all these bitches give. Like, I don't want to get married because my career and I want to travel and, it's just no fun. Nick, he gave an admirably honest answer, but, to be honest, um, it's an answer that's troubling and it's an answer that begets a whole more questions. He said, I don't want to get married because the idea of having this roommate I'm stuck with the rest of my life, I don't want to get married because then all my freedom is gone, right? These are all valid reasons, I guess, but they also sound awful selfish. And, if Nick had just said, I don't want to get married because honestly, I don't trust the process. I mean, I don't think I can trust any woman, no matter how she presents. He should have said, even if the woman herself intends to make it work and is a good person, the world now is so corrupt and so decadent that I can't trust she won't leave. That you know what I mean? There are all kinds of reasons. But he fucking answered honestly. Like, he literally said, I don't want to get married because I want to play video games, you know? And it's okay. You don't have to be right on everything, Nick. But, and Candace is so stupid. She didn't like go, say what I just said. Now, how in the fuck is that not the mirror opposite of what's wrong with all these women? And how can we fix this? We're all broken. Let's understand we're all broken, right? Here's my opinion on women. Women are the best and women are the worst. And it's always been that way. And every fucking wise man that's ever existed has known this. Women are the best and they're the worst. But they shouldn't be in charge of shit. Rushton says it is a type of purity thing where men watch each other and call each other weirdos or creeps. Yeah, and it's related to this idea that we're going to call the Epstein thing pedos, right? And I know I'm going to lose some of you right now, but it bothers me to no end that they call it pedos when they're dealing in underage girls. They're seducing many of them. Most of these girls are coming willingly. That doesn't make it right. They're fucking 16-year-old girls. They don't know shit. Again, women shouldn't be in control, and kids shouldn't have these sort of rights. I mean, it's a double sin to seduce a child and seduce a woman into prostitution. Nonetheless, it's not pedophilia. We've got pedophiles out there, sick fuckers like that gay couple that raped a baby to death. I mean, you know, and you just sound stupid. I mean, you do, and it's gotten out of and it spirals out of control when you say, okay, we're going to use this language, and there are so many people way smarter than me who are still using the language, right? And they won't say it, but I assume I don't want to think that everybody lacks such self-awareness, but their thinking is, hey man, this is serious. We have to use strong language and forget accuracy. We have to use strong language to attack this thing, but it gets out of control. Uh, um, and anyway, and it's part of what you're talking about, Rustin. There's this weird purity spiraling. On the left, they're policing, constantly policing for so-called racism, sexism. We have our own sort of version, right? This would be the woke right. This should be called this. If you want to use that horrible phrase, woke right, this would be it. And on the right, it's this purity thing, right? Nick Fuentes is Mexican because he has a Mexican grandpa. You you're splitting hairs talking about pedophilia, Dennis. Oh, look, these married guys are sharing this meme about their wife who's cute and charming. How dare they, right? So everybody's competing to be more extreme than the next guy, right? Like, I hate women more than you. I hate black people more than you. I hate the Jews more than you. I hate Epstein more than you. I believe more crazy things about Epstein than you. I don't believe they landed on the moon, and you do. That's part of it. Everything is, it's just competition, just like on the left, right? I'm more anti-racist than you. I'm more feminist than you, on and on and on. On the left, you got people changing their gender in part to get out ahead of all this stuff. Everybody's just trying to get out ahead of, whatever the fucking value is, right? Whatever the goal is, right? I'm going to outdo you. Everybody in competition. Um, and it's worsened by the fact that, again, we're all broken. Young men are broken. And I have nothing but sympathy for these guys. But, God damn you guys. Eventually you're going to have to go back. Eventually you're going to, I'm sorry, young man. Eventually you're going to have sex. This would have hit differently back in the day, right? There are plenty of 25-year-old guys back in the day who hadn't had sex yet. Uh, and if you had told them, yeah, don't worry, it'll happen for you, they would have thought, okay, that's good. That's good to know. Now it's like, oh my God, right? Now it's young guys saying, I'm better than you because I don't even want to have sex, all right? You have sex drive? What a fucking weirdo. What a creep you are. You want to have sex with women? It's like the joke in The Simpsons. Back when The Simpsons used to be funny, right? Lisa Simpson is going or uh, is going around. We used to say, "What you want to go around with me?" When we were kids, right? That means like your boyfriend, girlfriend. She's going around in secret on the down low with the bully kid, whatever, the ha ha kid, right? And so they're sitting on a hill, like a hillock, and they're sitting in the grass holding hands, and they lean over and kiss. And then all of a sudden, you see there's a group of boys there, and one of them says, "You kissed a girl. That's so gay." That's where we're at now, you know. And Nick, yeah, I know it sucks. I mean, it's genuinely, I mean, this is where I came from too. I mean, I'm alone now and I'll probably die alone. So let me be a cautionary tale for you. This idea that it sounds like such a drag, man, that I'm going to be stuck with the same fucking roommate. That's the way he put it, roommate. For the rest of my life, man. I won't be able to just play video games and talk to my friends. Your friends aren't going to be there past. They might for you, Nick, because you're prominent. But for most of us regular folks, our friends are going to drift off, even if they don't get married. And it would be a creepy, fucked up world if all the men groups from your 20s, now we just stay together and drift and die old, just like the women are going to start doing. Think about the women, right? Oh, the sisterhood of women is so disgusting to me. Like, get married, have children. You can still have your best friends, right? You still have your sisterhood of friends. That's a special thing. But that's not going to sustain you in old age. And neither will your fucking video games and your online lolbert friends going to sustain you, young man, into old age. Um, but yeah, I mean, eventually, and the scary thing is, like nobody's going to want to be married, just like nobody wants to procreate. I mean, and there's no real answer yet to the problem. I have the answer. You don't want to hear it, but there's no real problem for the fact that people, the fertility craters once a society gets wealthy enough. Of course, my answer is we're going to have to breed our children in a lab. And the fight for us as white people is, are we going to be able to breed our white babies in labs, right? Enough of them to compete with the Chinese and the Shules and everybody else. But we should just fucking get on it already, and try and figure out how we can preserve our humanity in this fucked up, creepy, sterile environment of lab grown people. But that's where it's going, you know. Russian says, I agree that pedophilia has a specific definition and conflating it with sleeping with young women is dangerous. Yes. And I'll go farther and say that just calling them victims um, and not looking at all at the reality of it doesn't really help either. These girls were seduced into this, and I've got news for you guys. It's, you know, on your block right now, maybe, in your city right now, there are pimps who are doing the same thing, you know, seducing 15 and 16-year-old girls into prostitution. And those girls are going to get treated way worse than Epstein's fucking, uh, what is it? What is Epstein's stable of hoes? Um, you know, and some of those girls weren't very honest and everything else, but that doesn't change it. It shouldn't change everything. Uh, and honestly, I'm less appalled by the sexual aspect of it than I am interested in knowing exactly what Epstein was up to. Clearly, it was an influence operation, and maybe it wasn't straight up blackmail. Again, maybe it was just they seduce the girls into prostitution, then use the girls to seduce the politicians and other powerful people into cooperating with them, working with them, revealing to them. Epstein seems like this guy, this sort of sociopathic guy who was um, obsessed with collecting influence, with gathering up influence, and he was probably doing it on behalf of Mossad. But as long as you all sit around and talk about, oh my God, I'm just outraged at the poor girls and pedophilia. These other assholes like Michael Tracy, who has made it it's his cause now is to debunk Epstein. Michael Tracy, if you know who that is, he does podcasts with Richard Hanania, so I guess that's all you need to know. But he's decided he's going after the Epstein, but he sees it as a big hoax. Clearly, it's not a hoax because there's so many questions. He did have connections. Ghislaine Maxwell is the daughter of a Mossad asset who was given a state funeral as a hero in Israel for his contributions to the state of Israel. Um, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't concerned with regular people. He wasn't just having sex on his island. He wasn't just a sex hound. He was throwing parties for the most powerful people in the world uh, and plying them with young poontang and God knows what else. And that's how I know something's there, right? It's circumstantial evidence. There's just too much circumstantial evidence, and Tracy's out there talking about, he's talking about a lot of things I just said. Oh, it's not pedophilia, and all these girls are not also innocent. But yeah, that doesn't change anything. That's, again, all these guys who are pretending to be so outraged about the sexual aspect of it are playing into his hands. Tracy, of course, I don't know. I mean, he's done good work, you know. He's done good work going after the Zionists, for instance, but there's something wrong with him. And like I said, he's buds with Hanania, so there's this sort of, you know, this aspirational class thing going on with Michael Tracy, right? He's like uh, working hard to distance himself from you and us, us dregs down here who aren't rich or cool. Tracy also has taken up this case of in Las Vegas, there was a sex sting that caught up like 8 guys, and one of them turned out to work for Israel. It was an Israeli citizen working for the Israeli government, relatively high up. He gets cut loose. And it's like 7 other guys are being charged with soliciting minors online through an app. So Tracy takes up that one. And again, that I think he's given up on that. I don't follow Michael Tracy because, there's just not enough. Life is too short. But he took that up, and his big gotcha with that was, well, the app says you have to be 18. Oh, okay. The app says you have to be 18. I guess there was nothing untoward going on, you know. Uh, and also he pointed out that it's kind of questionable why these guys got arrested. And he made a, I haven't gone into it deep enough to know, but he made what looked like a good point about, well, these guys might be getting charged unfairly. And he says, and why aren't you libertarians talking about that? Because it doesn't matter. The point is, they cut the Israeli loose, right? And these other guys, whether they're guilty or not, are on the hook. So the whole point was they cut, our government automatically cuts loose the Israeli guy because we're fucking zogged. Don't be stupid, Michael. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. You know, don't treat me like I'm slow, Michael. It makes me angry. Rushton Roar says Welbeck is not the most profound and he is somewhat pretentious, but he called it. Yeah, I don't know if you've read his last book. Could end up being his last book. Uh, Surprising. It was not great. I mean, there are problems I have with this book, but of course, Welbeck has been repeating himself for a while now, and there's not a lot more for him to say. But the book was surprisingly sentimental and moving in parts. So, if you don't like Welbeck, this book is a little different. You know, Welbeck started out harsh, cynical, appropriately so. Um, a little degenerate. But this book, I mean, I guess it's, he's getting older now and he's thinking about mortality. But yeah, I mean, there were genuine, beautiful moments in this book. It surprised me. At the same time, I don't know if it's that good. I mean, because there are problems with the story and everything else. But yeah, who cares about all that, right? Well, thanks for talking, Rushton. All these other assholes are going to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent. Uh, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, do I have anything further to say? Well, I was talking about the problem for Jewish power. Let's go ahead and go here, I guess. They have a double problem now. Now that October 7th has happened and Jewish power now is focused on Zionism. Right? And you've got people in the middle, on the left, the right, of course, among American Jewry, who are all going full Zionist. And that's causing them problems with the left, of course. And the left is waking up now. The same left that they've nurtured this whole time, I think. You know, you may not agree. You may think, this is conspiratorial. But I think that civil rights, feminism, these things have all been handy bludgeons. The same way that Kevin MacDonald argues, these have been bludgeons by which the United States and the West have been neutered, fractured, and all but destroyed to make Jews feel safer. Well, that's happened, and they remain out there still working in all of these areas, but now they have problems among the earnest, true believers at places like Americans United. So Americans United is this bullshit organization that claims to be against. Oh, hi, Dumar. Um, and they're having problems with the true believers now on the Palestinian issue, because naturally these lefties are taking up the Palestinian cause, and you could say it's for the wrong reasons. They just see it as settler colonialism. It certainly is going on in the West Bank, settler colonialism. Uh, I would even agree to a certain extent that Israel represents Western colonialism. It's complicated because they're not very Western. The Jews, uh, they're ultimately hostile toward the West, the idea of the West. They've been instrumental, and this is them being hoisted by their own petard. They've been instrumental in making settler colonialism a sort of dirty word. Um, but it clearly is that. Um, and and the left is consistent uh, in taking up the cause of Palestinians as the cause of brown people. I mean, that's idiotic. Give a fuck. But that's, it's consistent. Brown people being genocided at this point by Western colonial settlers. And again, there's some truth to the idea that it's a Western project. It's like our evil twin. It's despite all those complications, this is where the Jews got their ideas. The Jews modeled it, like I said before. The early Zionists, sort of studied uh, the British Empire and other empires, America, and they copied it. They took this, yeah, we're going to do that, but we're going to do that in Palestine. Uh, so, in places like Americans United for Separation of Church and State, that's the name of this organization, which is really funny. I mean, it's hard not to enjoy it in a way. Where's my cursor? There you are. Um, it was started by a guy named Andrew Seidel. And Andrew Seidel, here it says, Andrew Seidel, the civil rights attorney, activist, and author who has dedicated his life to combating Christian nationalism. Yeah, so Andrew Seidel is this Jewish guy he's an atheist, and he pretends that his atheism is why he wants to destroy what he calls Christian. For him, Christian nationalism was Pat Buchanan. For him, Christian nationalism is really Christianity. You know, now there's a genuine sort of nascent political movement that we could call Christian nationalism. Um, but, it's never really about that for him. It was really about so called separation of church and state, which means destroying the Christian majority culture. Anyway, now he's got problems, right? Because people in Americans United are rebelling. They've got a union there, so they unionized, which is a problem. Uh, and now they're trying to get AU to drop the ADL. And the ADL is everywhere. Remember, the ADL used to get away with all this shit, right? The ADL, the involvement of the ADL with organizations like AU was never really that big a problem. The ADL is very effective at crushing us, right? The ADL was out there pretending to be about fighting anti-Semitism and other related bigotries. But now the ADL has, of course, decided under the cover of so-called fighting anti-Semitism to crush the First Amendment and start crushing the pro-Palestinian movement, and crush the universities where this movement flourishes. So now they've got a huge problem. Um, yeah. So while the Zionists, through various, other organizations, are trying to organize you, right-wing racist, into becoming a Zionist because the Jews are white and the Palestinians are brown. On the other hand, the same cause, Zionism, has the mirror opposite problem, where they have to try and keep the lefties hammering away at, Christianity and decency and order in the West, um, you know, hammering away at everything good and pure. That's what's left of it. Uh, at the same time that they are promoting Zionism and the genocide of the Palestinians. Because Israel, as you see, of course, Israel is determining how everything goes in our domestic policies now. I've said for a long time, and I don't know how, we're all so stupid. We're all so stupid. It's been true for years. Uh, but, I mean, I said this at least 10 years ago to somebody. I said, if all of this so-called anti-Semitism weren't true, if it didn't really apply like in culture and, everything I've said about all these movements, if feminism and gay rights and civil rights, if they were all just movements, and or if the Jewish element was, not really a factor, right? And you could blame the Jews or credit the Jews with these things. It wouldn't make a bit of difference. It's enough for me that my country doesn't have a foreign policy, right? If and the idea that that could exist over here, but you don't have, you know, Jewish power determining everything else, sexual relations, racial relations, uh, morality around homosexuality, right? Even if that, it's a wash. That's what you want you to think. Oh, there are Jews on this side, there are Jews on that side. So the whole net effect of Jews being powerful and influential is a wash, which is a ridiculous thing to think. But let's say that's true. You still can't deny that we don't have a foreign policy over here, right? The United States, the most fearsome, ridiculously destructive uh, military force that's ever existed, has been completely taken over by Israel, by Zionists. I say 10 years, it's been, like again, it's been going on a century now. If that was all, though, that would be enough for us to say, fuck you and your fucking anti Semitism. Fuck all this concern about anti Semitism. We need to talk about Jewish power. We need to talk. But, it's gone so far beyond that, right? At this point, you see it now in with these problems, with this spillover, with the fact that our domestic policies are now affected openly. They always were, but now it's just so extreme that our domestic um, politics and concerns are affected by the needs of the Zionist movement, right? The First Amendment, most uh, obviously now, right? You can't have a First Amendment anymore, America, because people are giving, are giving, yeah, because Jewish students don't feel safe on campus, right? All those Jewish students who were hanging up BLM signs, right? Right? While your fucking city was on fire and freaks were chasing you through the streets, right? You still can't take transit because of the chaos unleashed by that fucking movement in 2020. But we don't feel safe because they're chanting from the river to the sea out there. You motherfuckers. You motherfuckers. Anyway, there's nobody watching and there's no thumbs up. There's no positive. I'm not getting any positive energy. So I'm just going to fiddle. while Rome burns and say goodnight. Thank you all for coming out. Uh, and it's, God bless you, boys. You know, you're good people. Anyway, here we go.
Look what I've created! Did you like my robe of grief? Totna, liar. History will judge my song, Petronius. Will it be great enough to match the occasion? I'm seized with a sudden fear that it will not be great enough.
You will be worthy of the spectacle, as the spectacle is worthy of you.
You encourage me, Petronius. But I'm aware that I must compete with those who sang at the burning of Troy. My song must be greater just as Rome is greater than Troy. Silence, ye spheres! Be still, ye hurtling stars! Open wide vaulted skies above. Now at last, lo, I see Olympus, and a light from its summit doth illumine me. I am one with the gods immortal. I am Nero, the artist, who creates with fire, that the dreams of my life may come true. To the flames now I give the past, to the flames, and so take now this rose, oh, receive her now, we pray. Consume her as would a furnace. Burn on, oh ancient rose, burn on, burn on!
A mob from burned areas.
They want to survive.
Who asked them to survive? Tigellinus.
The palace is fully guarded, Majesty. They will never pass my praetorium.
The night is chilly. Let us withdraw. Is it possible that human beings can produce such a sound?
Yes, when they've been driven too far.